Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the California High-Speed Rail Authority's Board of Directors meeting for July 15th, 2021. Welcome to all of you from across the state, and thank you for joining us. Today's meeting, as you know, is remote, and so what we're going to do is call the meeting to order, take the roll, Pledge of Allegiance, after which we'll ask the secretary to advise each of you how you can communicate with us and give you the instructions to do so successfully. So with that, we'll call this meeting to order. And Secretary, if you'll please take the roll.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Director Schenk?
Present.
Chair Richards?
Here.
Director Camacho?
Present.
Vice Chair Miller?
Here.
Assembly Member Rambula? Director Perea?
Here.
Director Guillemetti?
Present.
Director Escutia?
We know that she's on a phone.
I do not see her phone number called in yet.
Okay.
Director Boutros?
Here.
Director Williams?
Here.
Mr. Chairman, we have a quorum.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. I don't want to call out Director Scusia's phone number, but did anybody write it down when I mentioned it a while ago that you might give her a call?
We did write down the phone number.
Okay, fine. If you've got it written down, perhaps somebody could give her a call and maybe work out why she is not been hooked up yet. With that, however, while they're doing that, if we can bring the flag up, please. And my colleagues would repeat after me, please. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you very much. I'm going to wait just a second or so and see if we can get Director Escutia on board. Well, I assume somebody else is trying to accomplish that. So let's go ahead and turn it over to you for the next couple of minutes so you can advise all of the people who have joined us how they can communicate with us either by telephone, well, I guess all by telephone. And so please, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good morning, all. Welcome to the California High-Speed Rail Board of Directors public meeting. Today, we are hosting this meeting remotely via Zoom. In a moment, we will take public comment. First, we want to run through some important technical aspects of this meeting for offering public comment. If you are logged into this meeting via the Zoom application, please use the raise your hand feature, typically located at the bottom of your screen, so that I may call on you to provide your comment. If you're dialing in by phone, pressing #2 will raise your hand and put you into our queue. Speakers will be called in the order that their hand is raised. Once you've been in the queue and your name is called, in the web meeting, please click the prompt on your screen to allow your microphone to be unmuted. On the phone, we will call on you by the last 4 digits of your phone number. At that point, you'll hear a message that you're being unmuted. Once unmuted, it will be your turn to speak. Please slowly and clearly say and spell your first and last name, and if applicable, state the organization you represent. After your introduction, each speaker is allotted 2 minutes to provide their comment. Our court reporter is on the line to record those comments. If they need you to spell or repeat something, they may interject. I will interject at 1 minute and 45 seconds to provide a 15-second remainder. I will notify you when your time is nearly up. At the end of your comment, we will disable your microphone. However, you are welcome to stay on the line to continue watching or listening to the meeting. If you do not wish to provide comment and simply want to watch the meeting, you can do so by logging on to hsr.ca.gov and looking for the link to our live stream. Mr. Chairman, we have first up for public comment, David Schwegel.
Thank you. Good morning, Mr. Schwegel.
Good morning. Can you hear me?
We hear you loud and clear.
Great. David, D-A-V-I-D, Schwegel, S-C-H-W-E-G-E-L, U.S. High-Speed Rail, circling back after a great meeting with Sam Schwartz Consulting on turning California's transportation Titanic around by the 2028 Olympics, and Linda Peltz Realty on reimagining real estate in Fresno with phases 1 and 2 of our transformative project fully operational. It would be great if the authority could issue an RFP soliciting insight from across the board around the world on how to get phases 1 and 2 fully up and running by the time our nation welcomes back the Summer Olympics for the first time in 32 years. Upload those proposals to the website for all to see. Benefits of such a bold endeavor include a state legislature pleased to allocate funds, tech firms worldwide excited about the investment opportunity, boosted breadth and depth among the participating consultants such as the Sam Schwartz of the world, and out-of-state congressional representatives such as Seth Moulton, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, and Marilyn Strickland, fully committed to overcoming this challenge of national significance. Proposal themes could include an all-hands-on-deck effort of the Kerry Struggs of the world doing that final vault under excruciating pain, as we saw in the 1996 Olympics in Atlanta, so that Team USA can bring home the Olympic gold, and the expedited demonstration of Merced to Sacramento and Stockton to San Jose as true high-speed rail innovation corridors for the infusion of early ridership revenue. Friendly reminders, Buttigieg wants the U.S. to lead the world in HSR. Failure is not an option, and WIMPs didn't build California, per the California Alliance for Jobs. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Schwegel.
I'm sorry, I'm losing power on the cell phone right now that we're on.
You're on there.
Hello?
Yes, Martha, are you on now?
Okay. Yes, can you hear me, Tom?
Yes, we hear you loud and clear. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
You bet.
Thank you.
Next, Mo.
Mr. Chairman, we have next up for public comment, a Tiffany Yap.
Good morning, Ms. Yap.
Good morning, and thank you for allowing time for comment. My name is Tiffany Yap, Tiffany YAP. I'm a senior scientist at the Center for Biological Diversity. The center appreciates the need to create green transportation infrastructure that moves us away from fossil fuels and towards a climate resilient future. While we see many benefits of high-speed rail transportation, it needs to be planned in a way that avoids and minimizes impacts to sensitive species, habitats, and wildlife connectivity. Unfortunately, we're not seeing the necessary measures being taken to avoid, minimize, or fully offset such impacts. We submitted a request for a 90-day extension to provide comments on the final EIR of the Bakersfield to Palmdale project section and a subsequent delay in its approval so that we and others can provide meaningful, detailed public comments on the 4 volumes of documents provided. We asked the board to direct staff to support this request. The center identified numerous areas where the draft and revised EIR failed to comply with requirements of NEPA and CEQA, yet those inadequacies appear to have not been addressed or remedied. We're especially concerned by the impacts to sensitive species like mountain lions and western Joshua tree, both candidate species under CISA, and to critically endangered species that have been under ESA protections for decades, but whose populations are still in decline, including the San Joaquin kit fox. The project bisects through the Tehachapi mountain range, the last remaining high-quality linkage area for statewide genetic connectivity for mountain lions and other species, in an area important for incredible biodiversity and evolutionary processes. Yet there are only 39 wildlife crossings planned for 56 miles of at-grade barriers, and 5 of the so-called crossings are in fact roads, where traffic and lack of habitat will deter many species from using them. As currently designed, the rail in this section will deteriorate the unique biodiversity of this area, setting back the state's goals of protecting California's unique biodiversity. We've raised similar concerns for other sections like the San Jose to Merced project segment. We asked the board to direct staff to include more robust mitigation measures needed to adequately offset impacts to wildlife
15 seconds
connectivity
remaining.
and do HSR's part to preserve California's incredible biodiversity. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Yap.
Mr. Chairman, we have next up for public comment, Roland Lebrun.
Good morning, Mr. Lebrun.
Good morning, Chair Richards and members. And for the record, I've been unable to contact you by phone, so I hope you can hear me clearly. The first thing I'd like to touch on today is the announcement you made last week that Merced to Bakersfield would take 1 hour and 21 minutes, which is an average of 127 miles an hour, which does not qualify for Prop 1A bonds because you'll never be able to connect LA to San Francisco in 2 hours and 40 minutes. This is the latest proof of a fatally flawed alignment designed by people with absolutely no high-speed rail experience whatsoever. And this is also the direct cause for the CP1 contract spinning out of control. And you're about to repeat the exact same mistake between Bakersfield and Palmdale. This brings me to my final comment. I first reached out to your predecessor, Mr. Dan Richard, with concern about the RDP contract that you awarded to Parsons Brinckerhoff back in June 2015. I subsequently met Mr. Richard again in San Jose in May 2018, and at that point, he confided to me on the condition that I would not repeat it, that the authority had made a colossal mistake and should have awarded this contract to Arab, Bechtel, and Sister joint venture. Fast forward 3 years, there's been no progress issuing a new tender for this contract. And Mr. Kelly is now hiring the very same Parsons Brinckerhoff people who caused the entire problem instead of firing them. So in closing, my question to the chair is very simple. What is it going to take for this to stop short of firing Mr. Kelly? Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Lebrun.
Mr. Chairman, I'm going to briefly go over the instructions one more time. We did have a few attendees join after the initial instructions. For attendees who would like to provide public comment and joining us through the Zoom application, please use the raise your hand feature typically located at the bottom of your screen so that I may call on you to provide your comment. If you're dialing in by phone, pressing #2 will raise your hand and put you into our queue. Speakers will be called in the order that their hand is raised. Mr. Chairman, after repeating the instructions another time, I do not see any of the attendees raising their hands at the moment.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Secretary. We'll move forward now with the balance of our agenda. And ladies and gentlemen, you've noted after having looked at our agenda, we have just one action item today, which is the consideration of the board minutes for May the 20th. Thereafter, we have 3 informational items. So if I may ask from my colleagues, unless there's a request for any change on the May 20th minutes, if we have a motion for approval.
Motion approved.
Second.
Director Perea and second by Director Gilmetti.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman.
Yes.
Just a point, on our agenda 5 of the past minutes, there's a provision there for the board members that asked questions, and all that is being reported is the questions were answered by Mr. Kelly. It would probably be helpful if we noted those questions so that we would have all that information available to us.
Sure, the same as we do in the F&A meeting.
That's correct.
Okay. Okay. I would ask staff to ensure that the questions that are asked during the meeting are recorded in the minutes so that we have a complete record of questions by board members. So we do have a motion and a second. All in favor?
Aye.
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 Okay, that's passed unanimously. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. We'll now move on to item number 2, which is the 21-22 budget update by our CFO, Brian Annis. Good morning, Brian.
Good morning, Mr. Chair and directors. We have a PowerPoint, I believe, that's loading here. So if we could go to the next page. I wanted just to start with board policy on this and indicate that it's board policy 11-001 that the board approves the budget and we would typically be bringing this to you as an action item. Typically, we ask the board to approve both a program baseline budget update, and that's our multi-year budget, and also bringing to you the fiscal year budget, which comes in two parts, the capital outlay budget and also the state administration budget. The legislature has deferred action on our portions of our budget request this year. There are ongoing discussions between the legislative leadership and legislators with the Director of Finance, Governor's Office. So we do expect for there to be further action to finalize our budget, as well as some other components of the budget that have been deferred till later this year. The legislature does expect to adjourn on September 10th per their calendar. So we do anticipate that action coming on or before September 10th, and then bringing to the board any updates or revisions and asking for board approval of the budget in September. I could get the next slide, please.
Brian, can I ask a question on this slide?
Sure.
Going back to the previous slide. The legislature has reserved the 4.2 billion that we requested. What is the impact on this, on our contracts, if they don't approve it?
Under our projections, which detail a little bit more in subsequent slides, but under our projections, we do need the access to the new Prop 1A funding to be able to pay our bills in the latter half of the fiscal year. So if we don't get the budget appropriation, we would have to look at slowing some of our expenditures. So we match our expenditures to the inflow of future cap and trade, which is funding that is available to us. But again, the Prop 1A, we do require a legislative appropriation to be able to access those remaining voter approved bond funds.
During the Finance and Audit Committee, I raised an issue about CP1, that their budget now is about $3.6 billion, which is 3.5 times their original contract. And then if we look at CP23, they're probably over $1 billion over their budget. So is some of that 4.2 going to be used then to pay the existing CP1, 2, 3 contracts?
Yes. Again, I believe the figures, just to note, that you're citing, I believe, are from our Federal Railroad Administration documentation and the recent grant amendment. Yes. Just for clarity on that, those figures you cite are the what they call task 8.2, 8.3, and 8.4, which is a scope of activity that does include the design build contracts, includes contingency, and also third-party contracts. So also the work that would have contracts would have with the freight railroads, for example, or cities and counties along the line. So that's not exclusively the design build contract work, but that is the major part of it.
Just for the remainder of our board, if they were to review that, it's on page 50.
If somebody's in a large room or next to one, if you'd please mute your microphone.
Yeah, I think we should all mute unless we're speaking.
But at any rate, those numbers that I got were from the document that FRA has as part of the agreement. That's on page 50. And that's just for the sake of for our board members. Thank you.
Thank you, Ernie. Go ahead, Brian.
I believe there's a question from Director Schenk.
Thank you. Yes. Brian, would you refresh us and perhaps members of the public on the responsibility and of the legislature here? Is it ministerial? What policy constraints could they impose, if any? Just give us some background, or maybe Alicia can help on this as well.
Sure. Well, this is, of course, Prop 1A that went to the voters in 2008. But to access those funds, it does require an appropriation of the legislature. Prop 1A being a voter a bond act, it does any use of those funds from Prop 1A have to be consistent with the Bond Act. So that's another constraint. But we do certainly need the legislative appropriation to access the funds.
No, I understand that. I'm trying to go peel the onion a little bit. Is this ministerial? They just appropriated? Do they have certain constraints that they're allowed to put on this beyond what we know is in the Bond Act that has to be consistent? In other words, could they withhold the money? And if so, on what basis?
That may be a legal question. I do, again, I don't think the Bond Act compels the appropriation. If it's for the, consistent with the Bond Act, there could be additional conditions or specifications on an appropriation.
That's why I thought Alicia could weigh in as well. And if you don't have it at the fingertips, maybe we can get that answer later to the board.
Yeah, I think the best approach would be to put something together for you in response and send it out. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you, Alicia. And that obviously will be sent out to all the board members. Go ahead, Brian.
Sure. So I believe we can move on to the next slide. Just wanted to go through the status of legislative action. There's a couple of things the legislature did approve in the main budget package that was passed in the recent weeks. They did appropriate funds for our baseline state operations budget. This is the budget that pays for state staff and facilities. They adopted it at really the same year over year level. We had requested a few budget change proposals, and I'll just give you a quick few of those as part of our form to function and conversion of some consulting positions to state staff. We had requested 17 new IT positions or information technology that would reduce the consultant workload in that area and perform that work instead with state staff. That would have a net savings as well because state staff being cheaper. We also had a increase in our ability to spend out of the property fund, which is a small fund that helps us cover property related costs. And then with the May revision, there was a budget request to add 56 positions that would help us advance primarily the Merced and Bakersfield extensions to advance work in those areas. So those budget changes were also deferred in the adopted budget package. But again, the baseline number of about 73.6 million was approved, and that covers basically the cost for our existing staff level. The legislature also approved a trailer bill that extended the NEPA assignment period. It was currently a statutory sunset of January 1st, 2022 for NEPA assignment, and they provided a 3-year extension to January 1st, 2025. That assignment is to the Secretary of Transportation here in California, but it's something that the authority is able to use to great benefit to continue to advance our environmental process. So we're very happy to have that extension so we can continue that assignment. The authority has a continuous appropriation of cap and trade funds. So as those funds do come in through auctions and as they are processed through our fiscal control agencies of finance and the controller's office, we do have access and ability to expend those funds with our current authority. The legislature, as was mentioned, did defer action on the request for 4.2 billion of Proposition 1A bond funds. These are funds we had requested for construction and project development. 4.1 billion would be for construction, and really directed at that 119-mile segment, both to finish the current civil work, the right-of-way, some of the track and systems cost, all of those, all that work to, again, finish the 119 miles. And again, that's needed for our cash flow. And lastly, there was 100 million of that 4.2 billion of 1A that would be directed to project development toward the cost of finishing the whole phase one environmental process.
Mr. Chairman, I have a question.
Yes, go ahead, Director Perea.
Yeah, on that last bullet point, Brian, could you go into a little more detail? Is the reasoning behind the legislature deferring action on that item, and two, when they will take action?
Sure. And I can speak to some of the public things that have been said, and board may know that on the assembly side, especially, there's been discussion that's been ongoing on different approaches, different technologies for train sets and so forth. So I know there is a discussion along those lines. I will say also, the governor had proposed a broader package of transportation investments, including $1 billion that might facilitate transit improvements in time for the LA Olympics. There was also some statewide transit investments, really in total about 3.3 billion of additional projects. And I know that's an ongoing discussion as well, how those new dollars might best be spent. So again, I think there's this was one of those pieces of the budget that was deferred. There are others as well in other areas of the budget, but clearly there's a lot of ongoing discussion among the governor's office, finance, and the legislature on the appropriation, as well as, again, the other new funding proposed as part of a transportation package.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Go ahead, Brian.
Move on to the next slide, please. So this is a little bit of background that will I look familiar to the board from past agendas. This is the baseline as last adopted by the board, and this is from June of 2020. We have a 15.6 billion program baseline budget currently, and you see on this PowerPoint how that breaks down across Central Valley work, Bookend projects. We had added last June a bit of funding, 23 million, to do some initial work on Bakersfield and Merced extensions. So that's the current baseline budget. If I could go to the next slide. So this is the what we called in the business plan that was adopted in March, the enhanced baseline. So this did a couple things. On the top line, we start with the currently adopted board baseline, the 15.6 again. And in the business plan, we talked about different cost adjustments to that current scope of work, being about 1.3 billion. And so if you're looking at kind of the current baseline activity, the business plan had shown that increase to about 16.9 billion. I'm going to detail that 1.3 billion in more detail on a later slide. But looking to the bottom half of this chart, then these are the enhanced scope elements or new scope elements that were included in the business plan. About 155 million to advance design work on Merced and Bakersfield extensions. The 389 million for a train set purchase for those initial couple of train sets that would be used to test and certify the electrified system. And lastly, 787 million, which would be enhanced program-wide support, which would be for the aspects of really the ongoing program starting in 22-23. That, of course, is when the current RDP contract ends at June of 22. So this would be really for the ongoing program-wide support in that and other areas. So the adopted business plan displayed this 18.25 as the planned scope adjustment or baseline adjustment. But again, we would plan to bring this back to the board at a subsequent meeting. Next slide.
Brian, I have one question.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I understand comparing the 20 to the 21 that you just discussed, in terms of the RFP we have out right now for the tracking systems, does the 21 reflect the dual track system, and this 21, does it reflect the dual track or single track?
It would reflect the single track. So that would be a component of the 16.9 figure, would be the assumed budget for the track and systems contract.
Okay, but we have not made the final decision yet on the current proposed plan of whether it's going to be single track or dual track.
That's
Is that
correct. That
okay,
is
thank
correct.
you. Thank you.
Mr. Chair, I have a question.
Yes, please.
Brian, first of all, I want to qualify my comments. I voted against the business plan, so you probably know why I'm asking these questions. My issues is cost related to the extension of time. We're extending time nearly 5 years from original contract dates on at least one of them. There's 4 years on another and 3 years on the others. All that time extension translates to dollars in the long run. So how are those days and time extensions really figured into the overall cost of the project? And whether you've actually put together an estimate of costs related to any design changes as the design is being completed on some of these contracts, and whether those will increase the cost beyond what's projected here and what is being allotted to allow for a higher budget. Because I think the budget is going to be higher than what you're showing here if some of these issues are not resolved. And besides, we still have a lot of right-of-way to acquire, and some of the right-of-way, looking at the charts from the Finance and Budget Committee reports, some of the right-of-way is not really being acquired till later in 2023, where construction is expected to be completed by the end of 2023. So what happens if you have delays on those as well? And are those being costed out in terms of risk? And are those risks costs included in the overall contract cost to deliver to substantial completion? Because all that really is going to change these numbers in the long run. And I don't want to be kind of spreading the peanut butter here and figure out how we're going to pay for some of these cost increases later on when we don't really have any resources. Aside from whether the 4.1 is allocated or not, this is really an overall budgeting exercise that needs to be accomplished.
I think if I could, some of the next couple of slides may help. If I could answer your question by utilizing those next couple of slides, Andre. I will also reference perhaps the board presentation in May, where we did go through some of the major change orders of the past, including time-related change orders. And so, I would refer to that as well. We in that May presentation.
Yeah, my question is not really the past. My question is looking ahead.
Sure.
So
sure.
yeah, I understand what you did in the past.
Right.
But how is the future really being figured into the equation here, and whether we would have enough dollars to pay for all these potential cost increases? Because time is money. Time in the long run is going to translate to dollars. So
Right.
the more time we add to the contract, the more dollars we're going to have to build into the contract.
Right. So again, let me do a few more slides, and if I don't answer your question, please jump back in on this. But what I just wanted to indicate that we have continued to look at these issues and very much in line with what Andres mentioned in terms of finalizing the final designs, taking that and working with the contractors, figuring out the unit cost, the cost that, the change in scope might cause. And so we have continued working on that since the estimates of the business plan were completed. Those estimates were really based on work through September 2020. We've updated that with actuals through January 2021. Have also been some updates on issues of assessing these potential change orders and trends. Again, this is what Andre said, of looking forward at what we think's coming, trying to give the best assessment of what those costs will be, including those within our budget. There's also been a few changes of assignment in our anticipated cost, some changes of right-of-way where those were a few items were assigned to one CP, but were really located in another CP. So those were moved. And there was also a balance we were carrying under the title of CVS balance, and that was allocated to specific segments. So that's a bit of work that was undesignated in terms of which contract would accomplish that work, and that's been assigned. So if we could move to the next slide. This is first what's highlighted in yellow. I'm tying this to the chart in the final business plan. There's a table 5.1 in the business plan that was, I think, getting at, Andre, the issues you're raising. What are those future costs? How have we assessed them? How have we adjusted our budget for them? In the May presentation I was referring to for CP1 as an example, we talked about the changes related to Golden State Boulevard and its realignment and some extra costs there. There's a couple overpasses, McKinley and Belmont Avenue, that had some higher cost, as well as some freight-related maintenance roads and some construction related to the shifted Highway 99. So, those items are just CP1 examples. At the May meeting, we talked through some larger CP23 issues, some CP4 issues. So we've looked at all of those costs that are anticipated to finish the work. One thing that's changing is the completion of design. So clearly, if you go back 2 years ago and we're looking forward, there's a lot more uncertainty when we had perhaps less than 50% of design complete for structures at that point. As those have been advanced, we know a lot more about that. And, again, the budget has been adjusted up to reflect this forward-looking assessment of future cost, including the time impacts. So the yellow is, again, what was in the business plan. I did want to bring to the board this update, and we're comparing really the 3 columns under the heading of 2020 business plans to the 2021 update, the same 3 columns that have shown some adjustment. And then on the last column on the right, we show the change. And just to kind of drill down a bit on a few of these, and the reasons for the change is we have implemented change orders over time since last September. Those, of course, are reported in the F&A package on what those are. They sum to about $250 million across all categories, not just the design builders, but also other areas, right away, other contracts. So as those have come in, some have come in above estimates, and with where needed would have utilized contingency for those that are a bit higher. We also went and looked at contracts that were expiring, did some re-estimation of work. Some of the third-party work in terms of CP1 and 4, for example, had some expiring contracts that did not need to be renewed. So it generated some savings. You see on the far right column, $10 million for CP1, $5 million for CP4. Looking at right-of-way, that has been stabilizing. We have not been reporting additional parcels needed. So the right-of-way manager feels that will likely have some savings there relative to the budget that was put together for the business plan. Other adjustments listed, net other adjustments where you get to some support cost and other cost, a minor change there. And lastly, other changes is primarily the environmental area. So for most areas, the change are not that great. I do want to point out though, CP23, we do see some larger changes where we had savings in other areas. What we'd propose to do is direct that to CP23, where again, the ongoing assessment of some of those large future change orders there have gone up a bit. This overall budget remains at 16.9 billion, both with the business plan and the 2021 update that we're providing here. But note the CP23 has gone up in the budget by a total of 83 million as we would propose. And that's a bit of a crosswalk back to the, again, the business plan. And, we'll continue to update these as we go. But Andre, to your question, this assessment of future work, future design implementation that we have to do, what might occur because of these longer timelines for the project, that is built into both the cost change assessment that was in the business plan, further refinement of that since then built into this update column. And again, a contingency assigned to CP that reflects still some unknowns and other risk beyond that.
Right. So now that the design is almost 100% complete, my understanding is going to be 100% this coming month as I listened to the finance committee this morning. So that would be a really good opportunity to sit down with your design builder and nail down the cost to based on agreed to change orders, for based on the new design. I understand there may be some still some change orders that you guys haven't agreed to, some disputes that may have to be resolved over time, but at least based on the new design, we would know what the cost to complete is going to be, or at least cost at completion. Is there an opportunity to do that and come in with a new budget estimate to completion, so we know whether we have enough resources to do all the work that you're proposing in your project update?
Well, if I understand your question, I mean, that has been the process. This is worked with the contractors.
I understand the process is to update as you go, but now that you have a complete design, we've been talking about the design is not complete. Mm-hmm. We're doing this and changing that and adjusting here and adjusting there. Now that you have a complete design, mm-hmm. would be the opportune time to reassess the contract values and kind of start working from a true design build contract as opposed to really more time and material as it has been.
Mm-hmm.
So maybe Brian, I could come in.
Sure. Thank you,
Andre. So as Brian sort of used an example, CP1, we're working our way through significant change orders. These are impacts by third parties. So we've got Golden State Boulevard, we've got missing 2 miles, we got McKinley, Olive, and there's going to be probably 7 or 8 significant change orders. 2 of them Brian will be talking to later that we've executed. Both of those were delivered within the budget that we have. We have almost agreed costs for 2 or 3 more. They're within the original agreed budgets. And we are progressively working through these change orders, closing them out. But some of the negotiations do take a significant amount of time. It's not like a one-day session. Some of these negotiations
I understand.
4 to 6 months. So the 2 that we're bringing to the board today, they took 6 months to complete. But we have a good grip on the scope, and we're working our way through these. And similarly on CP23, we're working at site level, at sort of senior manager level and executive level with Brian Kelly and Brian Annis as well. So we are working our way through these significant change orders, but it does take time. It's not, we would love to do it immediately, but it does take effort and resources, and there's a lot of negotiating.
I understand the process. I'm really looking at trying to nail down the cost for the remaining work that is expected to be done on these contracts. You know, we are beyond the time where changes should be unexpected. We are at a place where changes are supposedly built into the completed design. So we need to be able to estimate the cost to complete. And if we estimate the cost to complete with a high level of certainty, then we should be able to know what the budget is going to be like and what resources we have available to do additional work. I'm kind of concerned about really committing to expending more dollars on other things other than the 119, beyond the 119, because we don't really know what the cost is going to be. So we need to make sure we're managing our cash flows based on anticipated expenditures. And those expenditures are contractual, and we need to meet them and we need to honor them. So that's really my concern here. Before we enter into new contracts or new work, we need to make sure that we can pay for the existing ongoing work. And that's kind of really my issue here. It's not, whether you take time to negotiate. That's not really the issue. The issue is how do we nail down the scope of work, the cost associated with it, and the extension of time that we just threw on top of the contracts, at least 3 years in some cases, those have to be figured into the equation as well.
Absolutely. So maybe I could clarify some of that. We've done significantly detailed estimates. So we have all known change orders, trends have been included in the budget estimate. There is contingency added. The time extensions have been provided for. So that is for CP1 and CP23. We have an end date of December 23, which is in the business plan. And for CP4, we have April of 22. So that has all been provided for. And there's a significant contingency for unknowns as well. So we believe we've done a reasonable job, but none of us can predict the future 100%.
Yeah, if I were able to do that, I wouldn't be here. So that's not that's not really what I'm saying here. And I understand you guys are working hard behind the scenes. I think my challenge is we don't really see those details of what is being contemplated. What are the so-called planned change orders that are essentially agreed to? What are the pending change orders that are being negotiated? We don't see a lot of that information. So from a comfort standpoint, for me as a board member, I'm not really comfortable with just, trust me, I can get it done. We have cost increases, we have delays, we have contingencies that essentially exceed the original contract values that we're spending. So the cost has practically doubled if you add all the contingencies. So we have a responsibility to make sure we're going to be able to deliver the agreed to work, which are the executed contracts within the existing budget.
Mr. Chairman, Andre brings up some good points, and obviously we're not going to have the design totally complete until August. I think there's CP4 is complete. 1 and 2 and 3 are completed in July and in August. That gets us back almost to a position of a design bid build. So, we will have the time at that point to be able to analyze more fully what the total budget is. So I think it's a little premature to try to finalize that now, but I would suggest that sometime in the month of September, when both of those plans are finished, that we'll be able to study that and wrap our arms around, the final numbers.
Yeah, Mr.
And I
Chairman?
would just
I'm
mention,
sorry.
I'm sorry, I think I interrupted a board member. Go ahead.
I was just going to say that and Jim, you're absolutely correct about once we get all the design, we should be able to get our arms around the numbers. But what we're doing, I think what Andre is trying to say, may be saying, I may be wrong, is that we continue to spend money, new money, on and obligate ourselves to go forward on contracts. And we don't know what that budget is. So we need to sit back a little bit and review what it is that we're spending, what we have on CP 1, 2, 3, and 4. On CP1, we are $3.6 billion into that contract. So we're 3.5 times greater than the original contract. Maybe some of that is righteous change orders, some of it could be delay claims, and so on and so forth. But Dan Horgan, the things that you talked about that are pending change orders that you are continuing to negotiate, is that already included into this 3.6, or are we going to see another number which is going to reflect something closer to $4 billion for that?
No, I can confirm that they are all included.
I'm sorry?
They are included, yes.
They're included in that 3.6?
Yes.
So you have an idea of where you're going to go?
Yes.
Okay, one last question. This is Director Perea asked a question about the single track or double track. The number that you provided us for a single track, I believe, is about $700 million. What is it going to cost us if we go for a dual track?
Well, I believe the 700 million you're referring to is a number from the business plan that was the additional cost of the second track itself. So we do have a number in the funding plan that's associated with all of the components of the track and systems work, the contract, and some work outside the contract from utilities, management, et cetera. It's about 2.3 billion that's included for that single track, and then coming back to add the second track, I believe is Director Camacho is maybe the 700 million figure you're thinking of.
Okay.
Mr. Chairman, this is Martha. May I speak? Hello?
Tom, you're muted.
Tom, you're muted.
Hello?
Yes, Martha, I'm sorry, I was on mute. Go ahead.
Yes, and it's really hard for me since I'm by phone and I can't see, obviously I'm not on the video screen. I really would like to associate myself with the comments made by Andre as well as by Ernie Camacho. And this whole issue of change orders has always been something that has bothered me tremendously, because I, as one of the new members, don't have a sense as to how much do we owe. And when I kind of feel that I don't have a sense, but yet in the back of my mind, I know that there are some unfunded liabilities, well, that worries me a lot. And so I was wondering, Mr. Chairman, would it be possible in a very simple way to kind of, get a sense of what are the change orders and for what? Some of them are for time delay, some of them are for whatever. I would like to get a sense, what are the change orders and for what amount? And basically get a sense as to when do we have to pay this? Because from what I've been able to see in some of the materials, when you add up a lot of the change orders that are outstanding for CP1, 2, 3, and CP4, I mean, we're getting to the billions of dollars. And that to me is very worrisome, because many times, unfortunately, I know that change order is very much part of this business, but very much we have to be very aware that there's only, a certain, how can I say it, amount of flexibility that we have in terms of trying to determine the I don't want to say the veracity of the change order, but, I really would love to see, some documentation on some of these, change orders, especially the big ones. So I don't know if this is done through the Finance and Audit Committee. Is there a way of kind of simplifying all this information in one sheet, at least for me, to tell me we have these change orders for CP1, we have these change orders for 2 and 3, we have these change orders for CP4, and they're for this purpose, for this reason, and it's for this amount. And we have to figure out eventually, if it's an unfunded liability, when do we have to pay this? Because ultimately that to me will tell me as a board member that basically we all serve here in trust. And by that I mean in trust, we hold the taxpayers' dollars in trust. We need to start thinking really seriously about when we're going to meet head on these change orders and the impact that that will have in terms of future dollars coming in to high-speed rail from either the state or the federal government.
Thank you, Director Escutia. And all of those are good points. I'm confident that such a schedule can be developed, and I suspect all the content for that development is already available and presented to the board. So all good points, and I would agree with your comments at the outset with regards to the comments of the other members, including Director Gilmetti. Brian, I'll be happy to develop this with you subsequent to this meeting, and let's put together something that I think we can, or you can present then to the board that will satisfy hopefully most, if not all, of the questions that have been raised today.
All right.
Okay. So with that, thank you all, and we'll let Brian, you can go ahead and continue, please.
All right. I'll wait for the PowerPoint to reappear. I believe we can move on to the next slide. So this is, I think, a familiar slide here. We had something similar in our business plan. It's really just the funding sources we have. Again, I might contrast this to the one of the prior slides where we were talking about the enhanced baseline budget of 18 billion. This is that was the expenditure side. This is the funding side, if you will. And we do show this for cap and trade purposes as a range of between 20.7 billion to 23.1 billion for the program. So when we look at the revenue and we look at the enhanced baseline budget we're talking about now, again, the revenue sources we see do exceed the baseline expenditures by about 2.5 to 5 billion, depending on the flow of the cap and trade revenues. So again, looking at revenues above the baseline budget by several $billion. Next slide. So this is the budget that is for the fiscal year. And I might focus mostly on the middle column of numbers here, the 21-22 budget. This slide does show the planned funding sources by area. So we show an estimated $257 million of project development cost. And this does show the funding source. This assumes 68 million of new Prop 1A and the remainder 189 million of cap and trade. Moving on to the construction area, we're showing here a 2.9 billion of construction expenditures, 1.9 billion of that from new Prop 1A, 900 million from cap and trade. This allocation of revenue sources does assume that, of course, we have access to the new 1A through a legislative appropriation, and that we would start using those 1A resources in November of this year. Lastly, there's some budget based on projections of the Bookend projects, and those do primarily come from Prop 1A. So this is a assessment of cost for the budget year. It does assume a significant ramp up in projects as these large commercial issues, large remaining change orders are resolved with the completion of design, and work in the field advances really throughout the pipeline of right-of-way, utility relocation, and construction. Next slide, please.
Hey, Brian. Brian, before you move on, can I ask a quick question?
Sure.
On the finance and audit report, year-to-date expenditures, or the percentage of budget expended year-to-date is 35%. This is as of May 21st. So you're only at 35% of your budgeted amount. I understand there's still 6+ months to go. So if you're not really spending at the level of budgeted amounts, how does that impact your fiscal year 2021 and 2020 or 21-22? And do you really need the 1.9 billion in 1A funds?
Sure. Let me say a couple of things. One is, I think in this role in government budgeting in general for capital outlay, there's some conservatism, right? So we have a plan for delivery. We have a plan for delivering right away, finishing utilities, procuring any change orders through negotiation on cost, and getting the work done on the ground, right? So we base the budget based on the schedule for doing these things. Any of these elements may have delay along the way for some structures, right? We may have a right of way that has to go to eminent domain. Utilities may take longer than we've anticipated in working with them on schedule. And, we have other issues related to freight railroad access, blackout periods, so there's a lot of issues in there. But as far as budgeting, these are, we're budgeting based on the planned progression in the field. And that's conservative in the sense that we want to ensure we have enough funding. We're also a bit conservative on the revenue side on cap and trade, and, tend to plan for lower side of the revenue range. So at the end of the day, this is a forecast, and the actuals are always vary somewhat from the forecast. But in terms of the approach on how we build the budget, I believe this is standard for how capital projects would operate. Again, you're looking at your planned timeline, planned expenditures, and ensuring you do have enough funding to accomplish that.
So are your planned expenditures now based on the new construction completion dates, or are they still based on the original construction completion dates? Or amended?
Sure. No, they are based on the updated dates, as Daniel mentioned, that December 23 for CP1 and 2-3, and April 22 for CP4.
Right. I mean, you have the projections and you have the actuals. Since your actuals are really tracking, not tracking in parallel, there's a lag. Is there an opportunity to adjust your projections to make sure that you're going to be within the budget? Because looking at the budget for 2021 or 21-22, if you don't get the allocation or the appropriation of the 1A, then technically you're on a hole. But is that really true based on the expenditure levels that you're performing at?
Sure. Well, a couple of things, if I could. I mean, one is, as in that sort of the series of questions you asked before on the spending side, as far as budget, we've updated with most current information we have as we went through those changes in the CP budget, and we do the same on revenue and expenditures. Monthly F&A meetings. Mid-year, we typically do a forecast update for what we think we'll spend in the fiscal year. But again, I do want to, wearing the hat I wear today as a CFO, I don't think the expectation is I have enough money in 4 out of 5 years. I need to have enough money in 5 out of 5 years, and I need to plan accordingly so that we can manage our budget and not run out of money.
Yes. So, Mr. Chair, I would suggest that the discussion that you and Brian will have, and maybe the presentation to the board in the future, that we really take a look at how this is all tied together and how it's laid together. And I understand where Brian is coming from. If I want to go out and execute a project, I want to make sure I have my budget to execute the project to its fullest extent without any interruptions and without any delays, because delays cost money. But on the other hand, I want to make sure that I'm operating within my existing budget before I commit to anything else. So all these really tie into each other. And I want to make sure that, we're really being given the right information to make future decisions. And I appreciate Brian's contribution to this and all the support staff behind them, because this is not a simple task, I understand, but I think it's really only fair that we're presented with information that we can utilize in decision making. Thank you.
Thank you, Andre. Appreciate it, and to all of you for your comments. All points well taken, and I can assure you that they will all be taken into consideration and incorporated into the finished product that Brian puts together.
Sure.
Brian, where are you now in terms of your
Sure, I believe just a few more slides left on this item, if we could pull that back up. And I believe if we go to the next slide, please.
Right.
So again, just this slide just kind of is intended to fully indicate that our budget is dependent on legislative action. We do, obviously, the last slide, I showed a 3.2 billion budget that included about 1.9 billion of 1A. If we don't receive those funds from the legislature, we cannot budget them for this fiscal year for expenditure. So what we would do if, again, ongoing discussions with the governor and remain optimistic that a budget package comes together on transportation that includes the funding we need for Prop 1A. But if those aren't assumed, we would look to cap and trade balances that we would have available to us. Under the base forecast, we might have, if we convert to Prop 1A starting in November, we might end the year with about 900 million of cap and trade funds. So if we don't get the 1A, we would turn to those cap and trade funds to cover expenditures. But again, with our current projections of revenue and expenditures, we think that would only get us to February or March before we'd run out of cap and trade funds. Again, as in the past slides we've discussed, if cap and trade comes in higher, that may get you a little more time. If it comes in lower, get you a little less time. If expenditures come in faster, et cetera, more or less time around those dates. But again, given our estimates on the revenue and expenditure side, we would run out of the cap and trade in the spring without the new Prop 1A funds. When we come back in September, if we do not have the 1A funds, we would certainly update as board members have asked for as well on revenues and expenditures, any updates we have relative to what we've shared today. We would, however, to stay in budget, be looking at how to slow down those expenditures. That could be deferral of new contract execution. It could be a deferral of existing work in terms of opening new construction sites. And I think the last thing you'd probably look at would be to close down current construction sites, which would probably be the most inefficient with demobilization, remobilization, cost of that. But any of these actions, of course, come with themselves with schedule implications, delays on schedule, and increased costs because of those delays. But again, we will, bring back, presumably in September, the updates we have based both on legislative action and final design and other updates we might have at that point. Next slide.
Mr. Chairman.
Yes, please.
Yeah, the statement here on the slide is if the legislature does not appropriate the remaining Prop 1A money, what if they appropriate a portion of that? How much is that going to impact what we do, but especially going forward, we have two major procurements that may be coming out: the tracking systems contract as well as the RDP contract. Will that slow those down as well?
Yeah, and you really, Director Camacho kind of raised the 2 points, right? I mean, a lesser amount of Prop 1A could get us through on a cash flow basis for the budget year. But as far as advancing the enterprise in terms of new contracts, that's difficult, right? To commit to new work when there's this uncertainty of future revenue. So that's why even, if there's not, our projections have never indicated that we would fully expend 4.2 billion of bond funds in the fiscal year. This is money, though, that is needed to finish the 119 miles for the current scope. It would be spent really over a couple years, about 2 years, we think. And it's really the standard for capital projects. When the legislature appropriated in 2012 for the project phases that were included in that 2012 appropriation, they of course didn't appropriate just the 1 year of cash flow need. They funded the anticipated level of capital cost at that time for that infrastructure. So this is the standard approach that I think you see for whether it was the Bay Bridge, new Bay Bridge in the Bay Area, whether it's office buildings. The request is almost always, and the appropriation is for the whole cost of the specific infrastructure project, not just the next fiscal year of cash flow need.
Our burden rate currently on construction is currently about 50 million a month. So even if we continue to do that for the next 2 years, we still would not expend $2 billion. So we have to realize, or at least the board has to realize, that we're going to be paying for some of our past sins or some of the change orders that came about on CP 1, 2, 3, and 4. So a majority of that 4.2 billion will be going towards those dollars.
That's correct. Again, as we would anticipate using the Prop 1A dollars when available, we would tend to use those for the work in the next 24 months or so once we gain access to them. And that is primarily the finishing of the civil work underway. We'd also have some track and systems work that would be starting in that 24-month period. So a portion would be for that as well.
I think that kind of acknowledging that would help the argument that we need the 4.2 billion to pay work that has already been done.
Okay, thank you. Brian, go ahead.
Sure. Next slide, please. This is our administrative budget, which I think is fairly straightforward. Again, as I mentioned, this is a kind of a flat line year over year budget. There's some about 3 of these budget change proposals that were deferred as well. We hope those are ultimately approved by the legislature. That would allow us to add some staff and reduce some consultants and advance other work. But we'll, in the coming months and until that's finalized, we will be using this as our budget for state operations. Next slide, please. Concluding remarks, again, just wanted to reiterate for the board, this is of course an informational item, and we anticipate coming back during the September meeting and asking the board to adopt a final budget for both the baseline and the fiscal year. In the meantime, we will be operating under the Rev 1 contingency to keep work moving. I do want to indicate here that we may exercise some flexibility of contingencies to make sure we can keep the work going. And an example of that is in the CP23 area. At our May meeting, you heard some of the significant change orders that are upcoming, the Hanford superstructure, intrusion protection barrier on 2-3, Deer Creek, Cross Creek, etc. So we hope to finalize those in the short term. If we do, we may exceed the Rev 1 contingency specifically assigned to CP23. we do have a unallocated program-wide contingency and another contingency, but we'll have to address that as we go. But I just want to highlight for the board that we are approaching for especially 2-3, perhaps running to exceed that Rev 1 contingency. State operations budget, as I mentioned, will operate on the budget that was in the currently enacted budget, some $73.6 million. And lastly, with the capital outlay budget, we'll continue to advance work and report monthly to the F&A. But if we don't receive additional 1A funds in the coming months, we would be bringing back some measures on what we'd have to do to maintain a positive cash balance going forward. That it would include a slowdown of work, fewer deployed workers in the field, etc. I believe that concludes this presentation. Thank you.
Brian, I have a question, and you may have covered it. Do we have any feel or indication of what the feds may be helping with?
In terms of funding, of course, we did receive the restored FY10 grant.
Right.
Those are additional cash resources that are sequenced toward the end of our Central Valley work. So that's more likely to cover the track and systems portion of the cost. There's almost some updates daily on the federal government's work on the infrastructure package. All versions, the Houses, the Senates, the bipartisan group, all have a very large increase for rail funding. So again, remain optimistic that there's restored federal investment in high-speed rail. And, that, of course, really hasn't been the case since 2010. So
right.
We hope that, and signs again look good from what I'm reading that, that is progressing at the federal level.
Now, have we received any indication of what impact the speaker's communications to Washington with respect to electrification and other issues, what impact that has in terms of mixed signaling and impact on funding?
I have not. No, if it could just speak generally. The governor's broad transportation package he proposed in the May revision, both high-speed rail funding and also the broader funding for transit systems across the state and other investments. We thought that had really a dual benefit. So it's not only to advance these projects with state money, but being that really necessary matching funds to, in some cases, match with local funds for local transit to get those federal dollars flowing. And I think, the delivery of federal commitments is certainly important. If we're able to continue to meet federal commitments, be a good funding partner, in general, that strengthens us for future federal grants. So again, we do very fortunately have a much restored, better relationship with the federal government, ourselves at the authority, as evidenced by our, grant restoration, and even the very much cooperative work behind the scenes is back. We're meeting, probably someone in the authority meeting daily with the FRA on one or another issue. So it's very much improved.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Mr. Chair, I believe you're on mute again if you're.
Was trying to avoid you all having to listen to me cough. At any rate, thank you very much for the report. It's been extremely helpful, and I'll be in touch with you on Monday morning, and we'll schedule out a plan here.
Okay.
Okay. So I hate to do this.
Brian, you earned your money today.
Thank you.
I think we can give him a year of it, Ernie. You did a terrific job. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Brian.
Thank you.
I'm gonna jump over number 3 for a second and give Brian a quick breather, but rather quick. I would only tell you, and those of you who are on the Finance and Audit Committee, much of what has just been discussed was going to be incorporated in my report to as a synopsis of the F&A meeting and the information presented in the F&A board package, our committee package. So I'm going to, with your approval, I don't see a need to go into repeating a good deal of the information that was just provided and questioned to provide even more illumination on the various points that you've raised, and we're also in finance and audit. So for today's purposes, I'm not going to make a presentation on the Finance and Audit Committee. I will, however, ask now if any member of the committee, if anything is scratching around in your head that you would like to have mentioned at this board meeting in consideration of the conversation that we've just had with Brian. And if not, then I'm going to go back to item number 3 and let Brian complete today's hearing with the CEO report. But first, let me just ask each of the committee members, is there anything you'd like to specifically point out from the F&A meeting of today to the board? Okay, Ernie, I see you shaking your head, and same with Jim. And okay, and Nancy. All right, then with that, Brian, if you've had a quick breather and a drink of water, we're going to put you back on for the CEO report.
Sure. Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thanks for allowing me.
You have nothing to thank me for.
Oh, there you go. Well, I was just going to say thank you for letting me present this on behalf of Brian Kelly. It's about 5 items here we wanted to provide updates on. The first is enterprise risk management, and the board was briefed at the December meeting by a Director of Enterprise Risk Management, Jamie Metalka, on the establishment of the enterprise office and also the procurement plan to bring in some outside expertise on risk management. We're happy to report that procurement was successful. The winning bidder was Ernst & Young. That contract was awarded in June, and we expect for them to be on board by the end of this month. Those resources will help establish the enterprise risk program, really the ability to evaluate current and emerging risk across the broad organization, not just the construction work, but really at the enterprise level. The 3-year contract, it was about, I believe, a $4.7 million contract. It does include various tasks, policy and procedures development, facilitating risk workshops, developing the knowledge transfer and change management plan, and creating this whole framework to assess and report out risk. Also, there's a risk committee that was briefed to the board in December, and with the consultant on board now will be fully established. Next slide, please. Federal grants. The authority did just this past Monday of this week submit 3 applications for federal grants in the program called Rebuilding American Infrastructure with Sustainability and Equity, or RAISE. For those that follow federal grants, this is sort of a new name for what has historically been called the Tiger grant program. The first one we submitted was a updated Wasco State Route 46 improvement project. The board may remember that we did submit this as an infra grant earlier this year. Unfortunately, we were not awarded an infra grant. California received 3, but they were primarily highway projects and for major corridors in on Highway 80 and a couple of highways down in the Southern California area. But we hope that this grant application and this different program will be successful. Again, this not only upgrades the current freight Highway 46 grade separation to have a greater height clearance, widened road that adds pedestrian and bicycle safety for those using the corridor. It also includes a traffic circle, but also relevant is funding that would help the city of Wasco clean up the former farm worker housing site after the authority had worked cooperatively with the city to fund the building of a new farm worker housing facility that has been opened. Second one is the Fresno high-speed rail station. This is really a first construction element of the Fresno station. Some of the Fresno-based board members may know that Fresno rail station is really the one very significant for the establishment of the city of Fresno. The railroads arrived and laid out a grid for the city and really promoted the early development of the city of Fresno. So the current depot that the authority owns, I believe, dates back to 1889. It has needs for seismic work. And so this first construction element of that station would be to perform that seismic upgrade of the facility. And, the benefit of doing it now is it provides some early use of that facility. It also preserves that very historic structure, should there be earthquake damage in the future. So that's a grant that would be 4.5 million request of the federal government for the project that totals 8.9 million. And I will mention, for the Wasco project, 25 million is the largest raised grant level. So we have asked for the maximum grant level for that project. So that's why that's set at 25 million above. And the third and final project is the Palmdale High-Speed Rail Station Implementation Master Plan. That is a very unique station there because, of course, the Brightline trains from Las Vegas plan to go there as well. And that's a Metrolink station. So you have three major rail systems, including two high-speed rail systems that plan to meet there. And as work among the three rail operators is ongoing, I felt it's beneficial to do some additional master planning to make sure that any of the three partners advance in the short term and the city as well in terms of land use can be made consistent with that long-term plan. So all three of these grants were submitted on Monday of this week. The planning grant is a bit of a separate evaluation process. The raise is split into construction and planning grants both. So, we hope here we could receive more than one. So we'll keep the board updated on this as we learn more on a federal timeline and action on this application. Next slide. A small business update. The board has in the past, provided comment and also shared concerns you've heard from some of your constituents and stakeholders on our small business administration. Of course, the authority has in the past set a 30% overall small business goal, but we recognize that there are multiple programs that we operate with. The state has a 25% small business requirement, also a 3% disabled veteran business enterprise requirement, and the federal government has a disadvantaged business enterprise program that's different as well. So these different programs obviously have different eligibility. They have different thresholds in terms of how you define a small business in terms of income or assets. So one business, may qualify for one program, but not the other. And we have received, as authority staff, as I believe some board members have, some input from stakeholders that the combined program is causing some confusion. So the update here is that the authority is continuing to work on this with external partners. The peer review group has been interested in this, as well as the Business Advisory Council. So we do expect to come back to the board in the next few months to provide further update and perhaps proposals on how we might best proceed for future procurements to, make this system more transparent in terms of how we're reporting these individual programs and more helpful for the small business community. Next slide. So this gets a little bit of an update on our change order discussion. Referenced a few times to our May board meeting where we listed both the prior large change orders have been executed in the past, but also forward-looking. And two of these more significant change orders we had listed in May have now been executed in CP1. Golden State Boulevard, a utility work. This is the change order that has to do with the movement of that street, which high-speed rail is originally thought we would just move to be butting the high-speed rail corridor, but in discussions with the city, we agreed to move it further to the west to improve their commercial opportunities and economic development. So this is one of about 3 change orders we're going to ultimately see for this Golden Gate Boulevard move, but this change order being executed does allow that work to be advanced and completed on the utility work for that project. And second one is access roads for the freight railroads. We had not had that in the original scope of work or contracts. This new scope was added as agreements were put together with the railroads as we build the high-speed rail next to their corridors. In some cases, there has been some restriction on access from surface streets into their right-of-way, and so we are obligated to build some access roads, and that came in at about $24 million for that new change order. Next slide, please. The WSP contract, as I think the board knows, has an expiration of June of 22. So we continue to work on the reprocurement activities. The next step in that process is an industry outreach, both to generate industry interest in competing for the contract and also to gather feedback that industry might have on how we should shape the request for proposal. We will be coming back to the board, of course, to release the proposal probably in September. But again, in the coming weeks, we'll be talking with industry to get their thoughts. Next slide. And we end with a couple environmental updates. The first is for the San Francisco to San Jose section. A revised draft EIR EIS is planned for release July 23rd, next week. This includes an alternative design for the Millbrae station and additional analysis and information related to the monarch butterfly. Excuse me. A comment period is expected to be open July 23rd to September 8th. And there'll be a community meeting on August 11th. Next slide. And as has been referenced already, the August meeting is a 2-day meeting to hear and ask for board approval for the Bakersfield to Palmdale final EIR EIS. The map on the right shows the segment linking Bakersfield through the Tehachapi Mountains into Palmdale. It's an 80-mile segment. Next slide. The environmental document does evaluate 4 distinct end-to-end alignment alternatives and 2 design options near the Cesar Chavez National Monument, 1 station in the city of Palmdale, and a maintenance site and maintenance of way facility located in the city of Lancaster. As a little bit of background, the draft EIR was circulated in 2020 with a revised draft circulated in February through April 12th of this year. And if we go to the next slide, I'll just outline the planned course of events for the April 2-day board meeting. And the 2-day board meeting has worked well in the past, primarily because it does allow on day 1 for the board to provide the detailed presentation, hear public comments, and then follow up on those comments in a fairly comprehensive way as they in that intervening 24 hours or so, and then come back on day 2 and respond in a comprehensive way to the questions and concerns raised on day 1. Legal staff will then walk through the requirements of CEQA and NEPA, and the board will be given opportunity to adopt the environmental document if they so choose. And that concludes all the updates in the CEO report. You're on
mute,
Mr.
Tom.
Chair.
I'm going to stop doing that. It's the first time I've tried it and I keep forgetting it. Sorry. Thank you, Brian. Any comments or questions for Brian? Yes, Director Schenk.
Thank you. Brian, I'd like to go back to the enterprise risk management presentation just quickly. Can you elaborate a little bit on the cybersecurity risk element, is how that's incorporated in what we're doing with Ernst & Young?
Sure. You want to jump on? Yeah. Actually, I have Jamie Metalk, our Director of Risk Management, in the room. So if you don't mind, I'm going to ask him to answer your question. Good morning, Director Schenk.
Hi.
Good to see you guys again. Cybersecurity is definitely something we are looking into. Our CIO, Patty DeSonger, is keenly aware of all the risks that we are undertaking. And when EY does come on board, part of the enterprise resources that they are bringing on board will help us in figuring out how to get to the next level of cybersecurity awareness for risks that are coming about. And actually, I just had a kind of a texting conversation with our CIO this morning in outlining a meet and greet so we could get that started once that contract is in place.
Well, two parts to this. One, of course, the state itself is very involved in this. Don't have to remind anybody about what happened at EDD. And hopefully there's a lot of follow-on to that to strengthen the walls. But in terms of our own high-speed rail family here, so much of what happens in hacking is by internal mistakes. And even CEOs make mistakes at biggest companies that they will respond to phishing or, I mean, it's becoming so sophisticated that I almost question every email that comes in, but to inculcate that culture from the very top to the bottom is of a significance that I can't even overstate. So I hope that Ernst & Young is going to be doing that as well as everything else that needs to be done.
Yeah, absolutely agree. I think in the last year, though, there was a pretty extensive training provided by our IT office that was pretty interactive to make sure that you weren't clicking on links or accidentally getting people into our network. So we have a pretty active, and actually I should say proactive, IT department. So bringing on EY will just help bolster, like you were mentioning, our risk readiness on the IT front.
But again, I don't want to beat this, but it's so important. Once a year is not enough. This needs to be ongoing weekly to create that culture of skepticism about what you click on, what you allow in, what you take home on your own personal devices. I mean, it's just we're not unique in that, and some E&Y having a big picture across the country can be very helpful, I know, but it takes us internally to keep that up. So anyway, that's just thank you for filling me in.
Thank you.
Thank you, Director Schenk. Thank you, Serge. Any other questions for Brian? Seeing none, then thank you all very much for your comments today, and obviously your commitment to the project and to make sure that we're doing this in the best way possible for the state of California and for the taxpayers who are paying for it. So with that, that will close today's meeting. Thank you out from the public for joining us today. And we will have a two-day meeting, August 18th and 19th of next month. We wish you all a continued good summer and good day to you all. Thanks again.
Bye-bye. Thank you, Tom.
Bye, everybody.